Hello, everyone, and welcome to our first time traveler session. My name is Ana Arellano, and I am a study abroad advisor at UCLA. The primary goal of this session is to help students who have no experience traveling domestically or internationally prepare for the departure. To do so, we will be talking about the necessary documents you may need to travel, how to find and book flights, the type of luggage that you may be needing to take with you, define what those luggages are. We'll explain what currency exchange is, how to navigate airports, and briefly cover the famous concept of jet lag. We will also be providing tips on how to adjust to life abroad and speak more about the notion of being an American abroad. I do want to make note that this presentation includes our knowledge of travel pre-pandemic. We acknowledge that these are unusual times, and when it comes to travel, there may be additional considerations or precautions that are not listed in this presentation. But this is a great starting point. So when it comes to travel, there are specific documents that passengers will need to successfully make it to their destination. These documents can include a real ID, a passport, a visa, and/or a residence permit. A real ID provides US citizens with access to federal facilities, which can include the airplane. The expiration of a real ID depends on your home state. You're generally looking into a similar length for a state driver's license or a state ID. A passport certifies your identity and citizenship and allows you to travel to and from foreign countries. A passport is generally valid for up to 10 years. A visa allows non-citizens of a country to legally enter and reside in a foreign country for a specific amount of time. There are many types of visas. This includes a tourist, a student, a work, and/or volunteer visas. How long a visa is valid for really depends on the country that you are traveling to, as well as the type of visa that you are obtaining. Finally, we have residence permits. These allow non-citizens to reside in a country, also for a specific amount of time. Depending where you are traveling to and for what purpose, this determines the length of how long your residence permits can be valid for. Sometimes a visa and residence permits can sound very similar. I do want to define that a visa provides your immigration status while you are outside of your destination, while a permit provides your immigration status while you are physically in the country. A residence permit is typically for those who reside in a country for a much longer period of time. Which document you will need really depends on where you are traveling to and for how long. If you are planning to travel outside the US, a passport is required. If your study abroad program requires a residence permit or a visa, you will be provided with more information by your study abroad program. You can also connect with your study abroad advisor to see in advance if your program may require a visa and/or residence permits. If you plan to travel within the US or domestically, you can travel with a state ID or a driver's license, but beginning in May of 2023, a real ID will be required for all domestic travel within the US, and a state ID or driver's license will no longer be allowed. Additionally, if you want to travel with a passport domestically and not travel with a real ID, that is possible as well, though it's not required. To obtain a real ID, you will need to show your proof of identity. This includes proof of your full legal name and your date of birth. You will also need to have your social security and 2 proofs of residency. Once you gather this information, you can visit the website we see on screen, which is dhs.gov/realid. On here, you can complete the application and you will be given a confirmation code. This confirmation code, with this code, you can visit the DMV office and they will provide you with that real ID. Typically, generally in the past, it was taken between 2 to 6 weeks to process and receive your real ID. Though due to the pandemic, there can be some delays, so just make sure you are planning ahead. To obtain a passport, you will need the passport application, which you can find visiting travel.state.gov. You will need a proof of your citizenship, proof of identity, 2 headshots, and your social security card. Once you gathered all these documents, you can visit travel.state.gov to schedule an appointment with your nearest passport agency. I do want to really emphasize that the pandemic has left the US State Department with an extensive backlog of applications for the passport. It is now currently taking anywhere between 4 to 5 months for US citizens to get a passport. If you are planning to apply or renew your passport, we would encourage you to do that as soon as possible. There are some programs that may require you to have a student visa or a residence permit well before your departure, and this includes you having a US passport. I do also want to note that the information that I'm stating is for US citizens traveling with an American passport, but some delays may also be occurring with other nationalities. So please make sure you're checking with that respective embassy for further information. Finding and booking flights. When it comes to finding and booking flights, we would encourage viewing flight options through search engines like Kayak or Google Flights. I myself use Google Flights. On these sites, you can compare the prices and different types of tickets based on various airlines. It's a one-stop shop, just kind of more or less give it a one-stop visual. It's also Student Universe, which is a great search engine that offers student discounts for students like yourself. There are 5 quick tips that we want to share in regards to booking flights. First and foremost, if you are planning to study abroad, do not book your flight until you receive approval from the program staff or you receive your arrival instructions. There can be specific arrival times or locations that you must comply with, so you want to make sure that you do have that final approval first. 2, see if if the airline offers any changeable or flexible tickets. This means that you can change the dates after having purchased a ticket. You also want to make sure that you are aware of the refund policies. 3, pay attention to layovers before purchasing. Layovers are the amount of time in between 2 flights. So let's say, for example, you're flying from LA to Tokyo, but you stop in Hawaii in between. Hawaii is your layover. Sometimes a ticket can be cheaper, but that's because you're probably stuck in an airport for more than 18 hours with that layover. So just something to do keep in mind. You also want to check what amenities are available within your tickets. For example, are there meals included? Do you have in-flight entertainment? Is that an additional fee? What type of luggage allowances are you permitted? So just make sure you're keeping an eye out for that as well. And the 5th, think about your arrival time. Is it better for you to arrive in the middle of the day versus the middle of the night? So don't forget to verify AM versus PM when you are booking your flight. Just some quick tips. So luggage and packing. There are 3 general types of luggage that a passenger can take with them to their final destination. These are known as personal items, a carry-on, and a checked baggage. A personal item can be considered a backpack, a purse, or a briefcase. Personal items have a size restriction as they must fit underneath the seat in front of you. A carry-on can be a small suitcase or a duffel bag. It does also have size restrictions and it must fit in the airplane's overhead bins. The overhead bins are located above the passenger seats in the aircraft. So keep in mind that size restriction as well. Checked baggage can be a medium to a large suitcase. These luggages are restricted to a weight of a total of 50 pounds. These are stored on the aircraft, so passengers do not have access to this checked baggage during their flight, as opposed to the personal and carry-on items where you are able to kind of gather items in between your flight or during your flight. When traveling with liquids or gels, there are some protocols to keep in mind. If you wish to travel with liquids or gels in a carry-on, the containers must be within a 3.4 ounces or less, and all containers must fit in a quart-sized bag. Items surpassing this amount can't be thrown away or just simply not allowed to pass. Quart-sized bags with liquids and gels are also known as toiletry bags, and you can find these bags as well with empty containers that meet that 3.4 ounces or less limit at stores like at Target, CVS, or Walgreens. You can simply ask a cashier for where you can find those toiletry bags. Quart-sized bags with liquids, just keep in mind, actually one recommendation that I would have for you to keep in mind is that you want to make sure they all fit in a bag, just because you don't want, if you do have them in your carry-on, if with the air pressure, you don't want the items to explode. So having them all within one bag keeps them, if there were some kind of explosion, not having that mess within your other belongings. So just a quick recommendation that I have and why those quart-sized bags or toiletry bags are handy. For check bags, if you plan to travel with liquids or gels in your check bag, you do not need to meet the 3.4 ounces limit. They can be larger. Once again, I would recommend just putting them in a bag or some sort of container that if there were to be air pressure that makes the item leak or explode, they're not getting onto your personal items. So just something to keep in mind. Happened to me in the past, so lesson learned. Currency exchange. When we refer to currency exchange, we're referring to how much of one currency can you trade for another. So for example, how much Mexican pesos does $1 get you? One thing we would recommend is checking out xe.com. They have a rate converter that lets you know what the currency value of one country is the value of another. So for example, here on screen, we see that the current value of $1 is 104 Japanese yen. We do want you to keep in mind exchange rates just because they are always changing. So this is just a great tool to kind of keep on hand. Where can you exchange currency? Currency can be exchanged in many places. This includes locations within your home city before departure or when you are abroad. Students can withdraw international currency from an ATM while they're abroad. This is quick, this is easy, but there can be some high fees that are associated in doing so. If you are using your debit or credit card, please make sure to tell your bank that you are going abroad or where you will be located. And this is to avoid any type of freeze. A freeze can happen if the bank does not know that you are abroad and there's an international transaction and they suspect this to be fraudulent. So just make sure that you are making them aware that you will be leaving the country so they don't freeze your card. You can also exchange currency at your bank or credit union. This can be done prior to going abroad, and this is a good way to have money on hand when you arrive. To exchange currency, you will need to plan ahead in some cases, as banks may not always have that currency you need on hand. So just make sure you're planning ahead if you're planning to use a bank or credit union. Lastly, students can also exchange currency at an exchange kiosk. These are more frequently found at airports, but you can always also find them at any kind of travel hub. Though they're conveniently located, they do have the worst exchange rates and they have high fees for that exchange. So if possible, I personally would recommend avoiding the exchange kiosk, but as mentioned, they are conveniently located. They are there if you need them, especially at airports. Speaking of airports, so how can we navigate airports? The check-in process at an airport to finally being seated on the airport, it's a multi-step process, and we will just briefly touch upon the main takeaways. Like I mentioned earlier in the presentation, there are some COVID precautions that may be not accounted for in this presentation that can include health screening or just COVID vaccination proof of. So just I do want to acknowledge that that is not accounted for in this presentation. It's very general. So on the day of your flight, like I mentioned, it's a multi-step process and it often very much begins before you arrive at the airport. These steps will include check-in, whether it's online or at the airport. It's going through security, it's boarding your gate, and finally boarding your flight. We will only be talking about the checking in for your flight and the security screen for the purpose of this presentation. And that's just to make sure you're able to kind of navigate it as an expert traveler. So step one, checking in for your flight. This is the first thing you want to do before any flight that you do have. This confirms to the airline that you are present for your flight and how many bags or luggages you are taking with you, if any. Like I mentioned, this process can begin prior to your flight. It can begin 24 hours before, and you can check in via online if doing so. This can also be done in persons via kiosks. One quick tip that I do have is that the week leading up to your flight, you do want to frequently check your email in which you purchase your flight just for any flight updates that the airline may have for you. And you can also save time and sign up for their text, or you can download the airline apps. It's just to keep on track that your airplane or your flight will be taken off the day and time that you have purchased. So just a quick tip. Checking in, do give yourself plenty of time before your flight to check in your bags, to go through security, and to find your departure gate. Typically for international travel, you should arrive at the airport at least 3 hours before your flight. It's honestly very better to arrive early than cutting it close and miss your flight. You want to plan for traffic, you want to plan for check-in issues or long security lines. So just make sure if you're traveling internationally, want to keep that 3-hour before flying departure in mind. There may also be a time limit to keep in mind when you are checking in your bags. Sometimes the airline may not allow you to check in 1 hour prior. They may have a 2-hour max, so just make sure that you are following those guidelines if you are taking any check-in luggage. A must know about the airports is that they are divided into sections based on your airlines. These are often referred to as terminals. Find out which airline you will be on, and then this is where you can go to the airport to check in for your flight and to check in your bags. So after checking in for your flight or checking in your bags, you will proceed to security screening with the Transportation Security Administration, or otherwise known as TSA. When being screened, there are a few things you should expect. First and foremost, the staff may not be friendly. They are not there to be your friend. They have to manage large crowds and move people through checkpoints at a very fast pace. So they may not be very friendly. Two, everyone is a hot mess going through security. If you're feeling overwhelmed, if you're feeling anxious, you are not alone. Trust me on that. I'm always anxious and always in a hurry, even if I've done it a million times. So you are not alone. 3, depending on the terminal or airport, you may need to remove your shoes, your jackets, your hats, metal watches or belts, and you may need to empty your pockets. They will be having signs if you do need to do so. Like I mentioned, sometimes it's the case, sometimes it isn't. So just keep an eye out for that. But it may happen, so just to keep in mind. You cannot have filled water or bottled drinks when passing through TSA. You want to make sure if you do have a filled water bottle that you empty it out or drink it before getting to TSA. They will not allow you to pass. They do have water refilling machines after you pass TSA. So if your bottle is empty, you can refill that water once you pass security. TSA does have a pre-made list of all the items that are restricted, and you can find that on their TSA travel.state.gov, that website we mentioned earlier, for that entire list. To make security screening just a bit easier and a little less overwhelming, we like to provide you with a couple tips. You definitely want to plan ahead for liquid allowances, which we covered a little bit earlier. Like I mentioned, having them all in one place, one, avoids the mess if there were to be some air pressure leakage, but it also makes it easier to remove and place bags into the bag, into your luggage if necessary. So for example, if you need to remove them, you know where to take them out and put it back in. It's a simple process. You want to make sure that you have any electronics, such as your laptop or your phone, accessible and easily removable, same thing as the liquids. If you're instructed to remove all the electronics, you don't want to be digging and having to just reorganize your luggage. Finally, we do have some how to dress suggestions. This is not what you're prohibited from wearing. This is just rather recommendations to kind of save you time and effort to going through security. So for example, having slip-on shoes is much easier than having some boots with laces and having to unlace them and lace them back on. If you're limiting your jewelry and your belt, that limits the amount of time that you do have to be passing to TSA. So it's kind of easier just to have them in your bag as opposed to having to wear them. Jackets and coats. It's always easier to remove sweaters or coats that have a zipper as opposed to having to remove your hoodie and then suddenly you see your shirt going up with the hoodie. So just to avoid that little bit of a mess, it's easier to have a zipper. Same thing with hats. You will not be allowed to pass with hats. So if you're having a messy hair day, having that hat on and simply being able to remove it after, it's a little bit of a hassle. So just being able to just not have a hat at all, it may help. Like I mentioned, these are just suggestions. These are not by all means something that you cannot do, just something through our experiences that we were able to share with you. Just other quick notes. If you are traveling while transgender, the National Center for Trans Equality does provide travelers with a guide on how to navigate airport security. And also, if you have a disability, TSA provides notification cards for individuals who have medical conditions or a disability. So we do have that resource as well. So customs and border protection. When you are arriving to a foreign country, passengers will need to clear immigration. This is also known as customs. So here you will complete a customs declaration form, and this lets the country officials know who you are, what you're bringing to the country, where you will be staying, any kind of recent trips that you had. When you are clearing customs, You will also speak with a customs officer who will review your travel documents and that custom declaration form that you filled, and they will ensure that you are legally allowed to enter and stay in that respective country. They will ask you questions as they find deemed necessary. So for example, once again, why are you there? How long are you expected to be here? Where will you stay? So it's just something to do keep in mind. Once again, they are not there to be your friend. They are here to, or they are there to make sure that the safety of the country and the self of you, others, the country, it's all good and go. So I tried smiling as many times as I can to them, and they do not smile back. So they're not there to be your friend. They're there to keep you and others safe. The custom officers, they may also stamp your passport. They can also take fingerprints, and they can also take a picture. So just keep in mind. When you will clear customs if you are arriving to a foreign country and when returning to the US. If you are traveling within the US, so if you're traveling domestically, you will not need to clear immigration. So after you clear immigration, you will follow signs for baggage claim. If you checked in any baggage, or if you didn't check any baggage, then you will simply follow the exit signs. Checked baggage will be located on carousels. If before leaving the aircraft or the airplane, the carousel number is not announced, you can check the carousel screens, search for your flight number, and see which carousel your belongings will be on there. Before exiting baggage claim, know that there can be second level inspections. These entail officers near the baggage claim exit, stopping you, randomly going through your belongings, and this is done just as an extra level of security. So just be wary of second level inspection before leaving the baggage claim. Jet lag. So we traveled, we safely landed, we cleared customs, and now we're at a final destination. But you may be experiencing what is known as jet lag. Jet lag is a side effect of traveling across time zones. While individuals can be affected differently, some symptoms can include feeling exhausted, perhaps even after sleeping on the flight or during your arrival. You may have a loss of appetite, you may have concentration or memory issues. This can be referred to as jet lag. So how can you prepare or best adjust? We do have a couple of recommendations. This can include arriving at daylight if possible. This makes it easier for you to stay awake during the day, be a little bit more tired, and that way you're easily able to adjust to the new time zone, sleeping at nighttime. You do want to make sure you're staying hydrated. This includes before, during, and after your flight. So also to avoid dehydration, you may want to avoid alcohol or caffeine during your flight. So this can increase dehydration. So just recommendation to avoid that. You do want to find ways to adjust your schedule to a new time zone before you depart. So like I mentioned, working up all that energy, staying awake during the flight. If you arrive during the day, you're tired enough to be able to sleep during the night. So just adjusting to that time zone ahead of time. You may also want to exercise, stay active, keep moving. Just as I mentioned, you want to work up your body, you want to make yourself tired so you're able to accommodate or smoothly transition to that new time zone. So we adjusted to the new time zone, and now how do we adjust to the life and culture while we are abroad? When we think of traveling, we sometimes associate it with an adventure and something very positive, and though most of the time it can be, there may be times where we experience culture shock, and that may not seem as positive. So culture shock is the feeling or experience of disorientation or the discomfort when you are in a different setting or something unfamiliar. This does not happen to everyone, but it can occur when you're traveling from, let's say, LA to New York or from LA to Spain. It can happen, though it does not happen to everyone. There are 4 stages of culture shock. They are the honeymoon stage. Here, the new culture is new, it's exciting, you're positively surprised about everything, by your host country, and you're having an amazing time. The second stage is crisis, where the realities of a different housing situation, different accommodations, different food, you're missing your friends, your family, this can all kick in and reality starts becoming overwhelming. You start to notice a little bit more about the negative aspects of where you are and the host culture. In the third stage of recovery, you will start to hang out a little bit more with people from your country, making new friends, getting to know the country or the city a little bit more. And this is an attempt to belong into that new environment. So you're opening to more things and you're slowly getting the hang of this new culture and this new environment that you're currently in. So finally, we have the adjustment stage. You will start to feel more connected to your host culture, and eventually you'll start to fit in. This makes you feel a little bit more comfortable. You have adjusted to the new ways, the new food, the new housing, the new friends that you have. This is at the fourth stage. On screen, we also have a stage 5, 6, 7, and 8, and this is known as reverse culture shock. So while sometimes culture shock is associated with going abroad, it can also happen when you return back home and have to readjust to life in the US or your life at home. Like I mentioned, this is known as reverse culture shock. And I like to share this actually happened to me when I went abroad for the first time. I had a wonderful time. I did not experience any of the first 4 stages. I didn't miss home, my friends. I had a great time. But when I returned home, I missed that environment of being abroad. I missed that food that I was not used to having. So I don't know why, but I was feeling sad. I was feeling angry, and I didn't know, but I was experiencing what this is known as reverse culture shock. So culture shock, whether you're experiencing where you are abroad or you're experiencing reverse culture shock, it can cause you to feel frustrated. It can cause fear, and sometimes even depression. But we all need to adapt to unfamiliar settings, and sometimes some of us a little bit more than others. So we do have a couple of tips for you. So how to best prepare for studying abroad and adjusting to the life and culture. So to help you prepare, first, we encourage you to find your support group. Keep in mind that you may not be the only one in this different environment, and you may not be the only one feeling this way. So meeting new people, making new friends, and socializing are a great way to feel supported and to feel accompanied. You shouldn't have to experience it alone. And if you don't wish to, you don't have to. So finding that support group can also mean creating a communication plan with those from at home, your friends and family. While they're not by your side, they can still lend that support. So just want to make sure that you're connecting with others who either feel the same way or can provide that assistance, whether close by or apart from you. 2, we'd encourage you to ask questions. You're in a new environment, you're with different groups, you're with different people who have different beliefs, who behave differently, who have different types of foods, enjoy different types of music. So use this time to learn more about others, learn more about their environment. You can expand your global understanding. So asking questions can be a great tool to kind of use the different classroom setting, learn a little bit more about global perspectives. Asking questions and getting those answered will really help you. 3, when you are receiving responses to those questions that you do ask, you want to keep an open mind. People of the city or the country that you're currently in, they may not think or act the way that you do. So it's important to not just simply jump to a conclusion or voice your point of view right away. When you are in a different culture, you are stepping into, you're going out of your comfort zone. So it's important to let other ideas come in or other perspectives that sometimes you wouldn't otherwise know if you're still in the US or in your home city. So just do keep an open mind and have a conversation, listen to what others have to say. 4, we'd encourage you to set goals. You went abroad for a reason, but what else can you gain from this experience? Goals don't have to be long-term. For example, a goal I set for myself when I went abroad was every week when I would go grocery shopping, I would try something new, new snacks, new frozen food, new drinks. Sometimes I enjoyed them and sometimes I didn't enjoy the new things, but that also will further help my experience. So that small goal of trying new things just really helped me learn a little bit more about the culture. So set yourself a goal, whether long-term or short-term. And lastly, be patient. Not only will you have to wait for a flight, for a train, but patience is needed to adapt or learn to this new environment. You're not expected to make friends or learn a new language instantly, but sitting back and enjoying your time abroad, taking it in by day, will help you further your experience just a little bit more. So what is this notion of Americans abroad? When traveling outside of the US, it's common for people to identify you as an American before any other identity that you may have. Also, if you are a person of color, you will likely get questions about whether or not you are truly from America. People may not think of you as American, which can be upsetting if you identify as such. So some tips to overcome this notion is to first and foremost come prepared. Do your research on the history or the culture of the host country and the relationship that they have with the US or from your home city. Many countries around the world, they do keep up with US politics. So it's common for host countries or nationals to engage in a conversation or a debate with you about the US and what is currently going on. When you're confronted with stereotypes, think about how to respond in a thoughtful, respectful way that opens up dialogue about sharing culture as opposed to kind of just shutting them down. Perhaps the person has never met someone from the US before, so you're the first time they're interacting with someone known as quote unquote American. So do keep in mind, just take time to think about a response. And lastly, we would encourage you to view yourself as a cultural ambassador. As mentioned, there can be times where you're the first person they meet from LA or from San Francisco. So just think of yourself as I'm representing LA, I'm representing San Francisco, I'm representing California, I'm representing the US in general. So just like I mentioned, take some time, engage in a conversation in a thoughtful dialogue as opposed to just giving your perspective and a quick shot. And with that, I like to take this time to address any questions that you may have. I know I did kind of rush through this presentation. There's a lot of information or specific details that are still included, but I wanted to make sure that I covered the main takeaways. So if you do have any questions or comments, enter them in the Q&A. I do see a couple, so I will be addressing those now. So the first question that we do have, if you don't have a passport yet, but only have your driver's license, state ID, can we travel domestically? Yes, you can travel domestically with a state ID or a driver's license up until 2023. Beginning 2023, you will need to have that real ID. But until then, yes, you can. Can we bring a hydro flask or a water bottle on the plane? You can, yes. You do want to make sure that it is empty while you're passing through a TSA or security screening, but you can refill that after you pass TSA. I always take my hydro flask. It's a good way to kind of make sure we're not using plastic bottles, but yes, you can take that on there. What type of snacks can we bring on the plane? That's a very good question. To be honest, I've taken anywhere from Ziploc bags of cereal to sandwiches to kind of leftover foods that I buy out of the TSA screening. There hasn't actually, it's a quite funny story. One time I was traveling while I was studying abroad. I was really obsessed with these waffles from Belgium. So I kind of just stuffed about 20 of them in my bag. They pulled me over. They thought it was suspicious. So when I emptied my bag, it was just waffles coming out of nowhere. It was embarrassing. But with that said, I'm not familiar with any type of restrictions of what types of snacks you can or cannot take. So it's just up to determination of TSA. The only determination that they do have, I do want to say, is that liquid ounces, but snacks, like I mentioned, I take it anywhere from a sandwich to cereal to yogurts, so that should be okay. And they do also provide snacks on the plane, typically if they're longer than 3-hour flights. Do you recommend buying a prepaid phone when going abroad? If so, where can we buy one? That's a very good question. So I personally did not have one when I went abroad. I use the current phone that I have in the US. What you can do is buy a chip that you can use for international travel. There are also some phone companies, I believe T-Mobile, for example, that has that international plan that you can use the data while you are abroad. So if you want to use a prepaid phone, you can. They do have, depending on where you are going abroad, they do have some local stores where you can buy those prepaid phones as well as purchase minutes, or just purchase a SIM card separately and you can use on your phone. But if you are okay with just buying a SIM card and using your own, or connecting with your respective phone line to see if they allow international data plans, then you should be okay using your own personal phone. How much money should we bring when going abroad? When can we research how much is appropriate to bring due to the different currency? Very good question. So I wouldn't, on a personal recommendation, it's different per student, of course. I wouldn't recommend taking more than about $300 just for safety reasons. You also don't want to have too much and then accidentally lose it. I would recommend having no more than 300. Speaking to the local bank if you are planning to transfer that currency ahead of time. Maybe just once you have been accepted into the program, you're getting ready for your departure, I would say no more than about a month before. but how much is appropriate to bring to the respective currency. There are some countries that have a limit of how much money you can take. That typically within the thousands. Unless you're planning to take $1,000 on hand, then you should be okay just taking a couple hundred. Can I request more than one passport just as a backup? Should I lose one? Do you recommend taking more than one passport with us to our host country? I would not recommend taking more than one. I think requesting one should suffice. If there was a delay or your passport were to be lost, that's something hopefully that the passport agency can expedite service on. Very good question, but I think taking one should suffice. We don't want to accidentally misplace that passport or accidentally have it stolen, and then you're left with no passport. So I think just having one should suffice. What is a layover and what should we consider if we decide to book a flight with the layover in a non-English speaking country? Lastly, so we avoid flights with layovers. Very good question. So a layover is the flight where you land prior to your destination. So for example, let's say you're flying from LA to Tokyo, but before you get to Tokyo, you're stopping in Hawaii for 18 hours. Then Hawaii is your layover. If you're landing in a non-English speaking country, that can be a plus. One, you're immersing yourself in a different culture before you arrive at your destination. So I think it's a plus. You're getting to know a little bit more. Should you avoid flights with layovers? I would say this is a personal decision, depending on where the layover was. Sometimes I enjoy layovers just because I can, for example, when I traveled to Greece, I wanted to go to Santorini, but I had a spot in Athens. So I had a 24-hour spot in Athens. Actually, it was less than 24 hours, about 18. So it's just a full day. So I got there early in the morning. I used the entire day to go explore the Athens ruins, and then be able to rush back to my airplane to make it to my flight to Santorini. So sometimes layovers can be helpful, sometimes they are not. It really does depend on how long you will be there. Does that really push back your plans, and how much cheaper is a flight because of a layover versus if you didn't have a layover? So there's some pros and cons. It really depends just on your final destination and how much time limit you have, as well as the budget. So sometimes they're a plus, sometimes they're a con. Is baggage typically required for pickup at a layover, or will our luggage automatically be transferred to arrive at our host country upon arrival? I just don't want to lose any luggage. Very good question. It depends on the airlines. There are occasions where once you check in your luggage, they put a sticker on there letting them know where the final destination is. So with that, you don't have to worry about it. In other cases, if you do need to pick up your luggage, they will let you know, hey, this will land with you. Please make sure to check in your luggage once again. So the attendants will be providing you with that information, but you can always double check as well with them, letting them know, hey, I have a layover. Do I have to check in, get my luggage and check in again? If that is the case, then you will need to repeat the process of checking in with the respective airline and checking in your luggage and then proceeding with your flight. So it depends on the airline. It doesn't hurt to always check in with them just to make sure. Would you recommend buying a prepaid travel Visa gift card that can be topped up instead of using personal credit or debit cards? Should we have it as a backup in case our card does get frozen or anything unforeseeable happens that blocks us from making a purchase? You can. I would stick away from it just because we don't know if US prepaid travel cards are valid in a different country, unless you're traveling within the US, and that should be okay. One card, actually, I'm not a sponsor for them, but one card that I would encourage you to look into if you can, if you have the means, is a Capital 360, Capital One 360 debit. So I personally use that for all my international travels. I use an ATM locally, so I'm able to withdraw cash anytime that I need. So there is no fee. They don't have an official bank, which is why they don't have those international fees. I'm not a sponsor for them. I definitely encourage you to do your research on Capital One 360 if you are interested before just jumping into getting one. But I would do my research a little bit more about that prepaid travel to see if they are valid. Another thing that has come up recently is Apple Pay. If you do have Apple Pay, that seems to be getting a little bit more popular outside of the US. I don't guarantee it in every country, but that is an alternative as a backup if your card were to get frozen. I know also if you do have a mobile bank app, it could be as simple as simply entering on there that you're traveling abroad, and that's okay. That should suffice. And it could be the same day of course, it does depend on different banks. but you don't have to call them. It can just be done through the app as well. But I do a little bit more research on that prepaid travel card if you are considering that. Obviously, our American freedom and rights is different to a host country's legal system. How do we know a police officer or anyone can say or do something that legally follows the rules of the country? Basically, not being taken advantage as a foreigner or worse, fall victims to a scam. Very great question. Prior to your departure, you should be provided with a student guide as well as a safety guide for you to be abroad. They will also be providing students with local contacts, local information, things to be wary of. They will provide you with kind of those rules, not necessarily the exact legals, but more information that you should know. On those links, they will also provide you things like how to know what is legal, what is not legal. Very good question. You will be provided with all those documents prior to you arriving. I can't provide a direct answer just because unfortunately sometimes not everyone may have in a different country the best interest in mind. But with that said, you will be provided necessary documents to know what is right, what is not right, or what is allowed to do, what is not allowed to do. I hope that answers your question. And if it doesn't, please just enter it again in the Q&A and I'll dive a little bit deeper. If we were to travel internationally, not with the program, would we apply for a student or tourist visa? Good question. It really depends on the program. So oh, I'm sorry, you're not traveling with the program. It depends on where you're going and for how long. So if you were traveling, for example, to Spain and you will be there for 2 weeks, then that's okay. There's what's known as a Schengen area where you can free travel with being a US citizen if you are a US citizen. There are other countries that may require you to have a visa. For example, I believe Russia. If you, regardless of where you're from, you will need to have a visa, even if you're just having a layover. So if you are planning to travel and you're not participating on a study abroad program, I'd encourage you to visit a travel center just to kind of know a little bit more about the regulations that would be required. Good question. If the layover is a couple of hours, not enough to explore, is it allowed to sleep in the airport? Good question. It depends on the airport. I shouldn't promote this. I would not recommend this, but I myself did have to sleep in a couple of airports just because my flight, for example, was like at 5 a.m., which is, it would not give you enough time to get there for transportation. It depends on the airport. Sometimes they will allow overnights if they are a 24-hour airport, for example. Sometimes airports do close and they would not allow you to stay in there. So I would encourage you to do your research beforehand. We don't want you to be there and then just be kicked out. So it may or may not be possible. Double check with that respective airport before purchasing that ticket with that layover. Should we look up the political climate or news going on before we arrive? I would encourage you to do so. You don't need to, but this is a great way to kind of just know what's going on. What should you expect? It's also a great way to kind of engage in conversation with locals. For example, if you're taking classes with local students, a great way to kind of just spark up a conversation and become friends is kind of talking about what's going on, what they think. Of course, not required. I would encourage it. It also provides you a little bit more context. So when you do arrive, you kind of know a little bit more of what's going on. And how to interact a little bit more with those respective locals. So just, I would encourage it. I see a comment of, I want to take snacks back home. Yes, I would strongly encourage it. I think that was one of my favorite things about doing when I was studying abroad, when I was exploring, is like, what kind of bakery item can I kind of take with me on the flight or for after? That's what happened with my waffle story of when the TSA officer just happened to open my backpack and there was like 20 waffles just coming out. So I would encourage it. Souvenirs as well. Another tip that I did not mention during the presentation, but it's travel lightly. When you're packing, I did the mistake of going to a cold weather place. I'm from LA, so I took sweaters, I took scarves. My luggages were filled with sweaters, but I didn't have enough room for my souvenirs, for all those snacks, for all those goodies that I bought while I was abroad. So I would encourage you to pack lightly to include those snacks as well. So just a personal recommendation. So I'll give it another 30 seconds if you have any questions to enter them in the Q&A. Very, very good questions so far. So there's a question, what if we find a boo abroad? Well, that's great. It's a great way. You're making connections, you're making friends. That'd be great. How big can a souvenir be? There are items known as oversized or over baggaged items. So for example, in experiences that I have in airports, there were cases where I've seen individuals taking surfboards, for example. There is a process for this. Like I mentioned, they're called oversized or over baggage items. These can include a separate fee. So for example, let's say, for example, you're checking in your bag luggage, that's a fee. You would pay an additional fee for that oversized item. So how big can a souvenir be? If it fits within your checked in luggage, you should be okay that if it fits there, it fits. If it doesn't, then that would be considered an oversized item, and then additional fees can be accumulated. So I'll give it 30 more seconds. These are all great questions. Thank you everyone for asking them. Perfect. If you can't think of any questions now, but you may have some in the future, I would like to make myself available for any questions that you do have. My email address is on screen, so it's arellano@ieo.ucla.edu. I am a UCLA Study Abroad advisor. However, if you have any questions, I appreciate you joining this presentation, and I'd be more than happy to answer those. Like I mentioned, if you also want a copy of this presentation slides, you can always send me an email, let me know, hey, I joined the session, I'd like a copy, I can send that to you. Otherwise, the recording will be available by tomorrow within our UCLA Study Abroad page. I see one quick note about Capital 1360. Yes, I that's a card I use. Of course, you're free to make your own decision, but Capital 360 debit card for international travel ATM withdrawal is what I use. And with that, once again, thank you all for attending. I really appreciate it. I appreciate your questions. I appreciate your comments. They were all great. It made a great interactive session, and I hope you have a great rest of your day.